Hey Alice, this episode of Those Happy Places is a little different, right?
That's right. We had the absolute pleasure of being able to talk to a wonderful man who goes by Iron Horse Steve. And Iron Horse Steve was one of the docents at the museum inside of Knott's Berry Farm. And he gave us an incredible tour of the place and walked us through the history of Knott's Berry Farm. And we recorded the whole thing with his permission, recorded the whole thing. And he gave us so much insight into the park that we're going to be touching on throughout. But since we recorded this interview with him, we're going to let you hear his voice from time to time and share some of the wisdom that he shared with us. So
Here's the rest of the episode. Welcome back to Those Happy Places, the podcast that treats theme parks, rides, and attractions like literature. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
And Alice, we have just returned from our second fact-finding mission at Knott's Berry Farm, which is in Buena Park, California. And this episode is dedicated to, it's almost a tribute. Almost a tribute to Knott's Berry Farm itself, and the history and storytelling that surrounds that place.
That's right. On this particular fact-finding mission, we were not after rides or necessarily attractions, but rather for history.
Yeah, for the park itself, and the way that the park as a landmark and as a museum almost, and quite literally a museum in one part, functions as a community space almost, a way for people in the area to understand a part of their history and experience part of it as well.
Right. So many people in this area, like my grandparents, I remember them talking about this when I was growing up. Remember Knott's Berry Farm as a space that was, it was exactly as it sounded. It was a berry farm, or they remember it as being just, that little spot of land over there with a stagecoach and a good chicken restaurant. And Knott's Berry Farm itself has grown with the city of Buena Park and with the area of Southern California, and has grown into something bigger and more symbolic of the space. And I think I'd like to talk about that tonight, about what the park means to the space that it's in, and the history of our hometown.
So Alice, you and I love Disneyland.
Yes.
And we talk about Disneyland all the time on this show. And
well, yeah, it's a standard for theme parks.
Yeah, you
could
say that it sets a bar, and it's kind of a gold standard in that way. And we grew up at Disneyland as well, and we were talking about how we were Disney punks. We had our annual passes, and we would just kind of hang out at the parks, and that was a big part of how we became educated about theme parks.
Yes.
So kind of how we learned what theme parks were. But I would say even earlier, maybe, Knott's Berry Farm was a place for us to go for maybe different reasons, I would say. Such as the old standard school trip in 4th grade.
Every elementary school in the area at some point or another, at one grade or another, brings the class to Knott's Berry Farm.
Yeah.
And specifically to the Ghost Town section of Knott's Berry Farm, where you get to learn about early California history and pan for gold and how that all worked. And you get like a history lesson on top of your okay, kids, run around for a couple hours and go ride a couple rides. And
yeah. I think we always got to go on one big ride. I do remember panning for gold, and I think I might still have gold somewhere from Knott's Berry Farm.
I think I do too.
And that's crazy that this place was so open and accessible, I think was the word you were using.
Accessible, yes. Yes, Knott's Berry Farm is, to this area, the most accessible park, in that it's cheaper. It's easy to get to. It's surrounded by neighborhoods, people that just walk there. It's a very accessible place. When we were in the park today, you pointed and went, I just want you to realize, Alice, that is La Palma Avenue right there.
Yes.
Like right there.
And it was only separated from where we were standing by
like
a roller coaster and a fence.
And because it's not tucked away, hidden in its own little mini city in the middle of Anaheim, like Disneyland is, and it's not way out in the middle of the valley and the valley desert like Six Flags is. It's literally just in the middle of a couple of neighborhoods in the middle of Buena Park.
That's the strangest thing I think about. Maybe not strangest, but one of the most interesting things about it is that it was a berry farm.
Yes.
And so was that entire area. And Disneyland was also an orange grove. And you get this connection to agriculture and kind of down home country living. But this area is suburban, very, very suburban, and not even close to rural in the least. I mean, we are in one of the largest urban/suburban sprawls in the country, I would say. The Los Angeles, Orange County, Long Beach kind of amalgamation
metropolitan area.
Yeah, is just city for forever.
Right. But Knott's Berry Farm and its little pocket, from the name to the ghost town inside of it, is kind of carved itself out of this little corner of, do you remember when California was a ghost town? Do you remember when California was a series of mines and the reason why people came here was to pan for gold and to, carve out their Wild West existence? Knott's Berry Farm is the Wild West of theme parks.
It is.
It's a little edgier. It's got the bigger roller coasters. It's so close to a place as simple and safe as Disneyland, but you've got crazy roller coasters like Accelerator and the new Hang Time that are a little scary and a little dangerous.
Alice, we were if you are just joining us, listeners, please do go back one episode and listen to what we were talking about Accelerator and Hang Time.
Hang Time is so scary.
Hang Time is truly scary.
It didn't get less scary watching it in action again today. I was having flashbacks.
No. But that's what's so interesting about Knott's, is that it very much feels like your backyard theme park.
Yes.
And that's
unique. So many. There are tons of neighborhoods in Buena Park that are walkable to Knott's Berry Farm. I don't think you could walk into Disney.
There are houses close to parking lots that are within a mile of Disneyland.
It would take a lot of effort to walk from distance into Disneyland.
Yes.
And because it's a little secluded from the city, and that has its place. They do a really good job of shutting out the outside world when you're in there. You are immersed in your Disney land.
Yeah, there are parts of Disneyland where all that separates you from Ball, is it? Ball Road?
Catella.
A Ball or Catella is a fence and a roller coaster. But Disneyland works very, very hard to avoid you noticing that.
Yes.
Whereas Knott's has one 10-foot fence, I would say, that kind of goes all the way around it. It is too high to see over.
But you can hear the cars going by.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can see the park from miles away. And
any roller coaster that you go on immediately shatters any kind of immersion. But that's not what they're after at Knott's.
No, it's not about immersion.
No.
It's about accessibility.
Yeah, it's about it being right there. And it's almost comforting to know how close it is and how easy it is to get to. And Alice, we were there for 2 hours today.
Yep, we spent just almost exactly 2 hours in the park. We rode 2 rides.
Yeah,
and spent some time in the museum.
And we watched a show, and we ran into a few people that we had like little conversations with, and I felt more connected to Knott's as a location, as a community space, than I would at Disneyland, where I would be very focused on getting as much of it as possible, like really kind of allocating Disney into my experience bin. At Knott's, it was just kind of like, we can meander, we can slow down, we can wander and look, we can lean casually, we can sit on a bench, we can just kind of be.
It's as much a park as it is a theme park.
Interesting, yeah. And Knott's markets itself as America's first theme park.
Yes.
Now, we cannot confirm or deny that statistic.
I'm sure so many people claim to have been the first theme park.
But it is a very early theme park. And we'll be talking a little bit about that history in a second. And the thing about Knott's as a theme park is that its theme does seem to be California through the ages.
Yes.
Different aspects of California, which is funny because we've talked about a theme park that is like that.
Disney's California Adventure.
And I think, Alice, we have said this to ourselves at least before, but Knott's does seem a lot more adventurous about the history of California. And I would say that it's almost more honest in a way. And that it's more focused on sharing the history rather than showcasing its better parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but Knott's Berry Farm simultaneously romanticizes, but also really shows you things like the Old West.
Yeah.
It's a little romantic. You've got the really innocent train robbery when you're riding the train around. They're like, stick 'em up, we got you.
Pow, pow.
Pow, pow. and you're like, oh, that was fun and funny and stuff. But they also do things like have legitimate showcases by people who demonstrating Native American culture from the area. And you've got a real working blacksmith that will stand there and teach you about the blacksmithing process and show you how hard and dirty that work is. And you've got a whole museum in the middle of Ghost Town that's filled with artifacts and pictures from real people, like real actual people from the area and what they did and the Knott family and their personal collection of artifacts.
Yeah, and what's so special about it is that as much as it's kind of about Knott's Berry Farm, as it were, and the chicken restaurant that was attached to it that kind of necessitated the theme park. We'll get into this in a second, I promise. It's also about the land, and it's also about big pieces of California history, and it's also about the people who were here before, and the thing that really blew my mind, Alice, was the first time we were there in a long time, where we found the missions, the California missions.
Yeah.
Now, non-Californians, you may not know, California has a series of missions that were established by Spanish Catholic missionaries when they were colonizing California, that were each a day's horse ride apart from each other. That's how they were spaced out.
That's how the story goes, and they're approximately about a day's horse ride where you can ride the length of California, and every single night you could come across a new Catholic church and corresponding missionary space to stay the night at. And you can go from all the way from, actually, I think the first one's in Mexico.
Yeah, Baja, Mexico.
And you could ride the entire coast all the way up to the bay and always have a place to stay.
Yeah.
And those missions are so important to the development of certain major metropolitan areas in California that every year, every single student in California, or every fourth grade student in California learns about the missions, visits the one that's closest to them as a field trip, and you build little diagrams,
little model missions,
little dioramas of the missions out of cardboard and foam and whatever, and you kind of compete with your classmates on how cool yours is. And I remember in 4th grade, we took a field trip. We took a bus down to San Juan Capistrano.
That was the one that I went to as well.
That's the closest one to us, I think. And then they told us to go on our own if we could, to go visit one. And my parents and I drove all the way up to San Buenaventura, and we went and saw that one, and I did my diagram on that one. I built a little mini San Buenaventura, and we've all done it. Which one did you build a diorama of?
I visited and built San Luis Obispo.
San Luis Obispo,
yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, on top of the field trip to San Juan Capistrano, also made a pilgrimage, almost, you could call it, to San Luis Obispo, stayed the night near it so that we could tour it properly. Like, this was a big deal when we were 10 years old.
Yes.
This was like almost a rite of passage, to the point that it's baked into the curriculum of our educational system.
Yeah, 4th grade is always California history.
And California history always has a unit on the missions.
And when we were walking around Knott's Berry Farm, and I vaguely remember this from years past and visits past, but walking around Knott's Berry Farm this weekend, we discovered that Knott's Berry Farm has little mini dioramas, obviously much fancier than anything we'd make in school.
I would say only barely, Alice.
Much fancier than anything I made in school. Sure. I'm a terrible artist.
Sure.
But little mini dioramas of every single mission. And a little little display and some information on the mission and what makes that one unique from its brethren. The year that it was founded at the top, and they're spaced out all over the park.
Yeah, all near the Fiesta Village area of the theme park.
Yeah, that's the other thing. In addition to doing Native American and like early like cowboy and mining history, Knott's Berry Farm has a whole section dedicated to the history of the Mexican influence on Southern California.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's called Fiesta Village, and it steps a little into some pretty heavy stereotypes occasionally. But for the most part, it's hey, we used to be part of Mexico.
Yeah.
And here is some Mexican culture for you.
Yeah.
And it's fabulous. So from the Fiesta Village area, kind of stretching towards the front of the park and almost all the way to Ghost Town, you have a line of dioramas.
California missions. And Alice, I think that's part of what makes Knott's so special. I mean, from your approach, as you get close to Knott's, you see the skyline. And the skyline is the tower with the giant K on top of it, and the arc of Accelerator, Supreme Scream, and you can see that from very far away, and it kind of defines Knott's for a lot of people because like these are the big thrill rides, the landmarks. But more than 50% of Knott's is dedicated to this kind of smaller, demonstrative, historical, almost reenactment, but like more fun than, right? Like, it's not like, this is a functioning ghost town. It's like, this is how Ghost Town life might have been. And like, it's just like a little bit more.
They have a Wild West stunt show, and every once in a while the cowboys will step out into the street and do a little shootout thing.
Yeah, and there's a real functioning stagecoach and an actual steam locomotive that I would say is larger and more impressive to have in a theme park than anything that Disneyland has.
It's big.
It's huge, and it's genuine, and everything in it is original and restored. And
something we learned this time was so many of the buildings, the actual physical structure buildings that you walk into, either to walk onto a ride or go buy some merch or whatever, those physical buildings are original Ghost Town artifacts.
Yeah, Walter Knott
from
bought Calico's extra buildings.
Calico, California was a ghost town, and he went over there and broke down the town, essentially, and rebuilt it in Buena Park. And those buildings are still there. They're a literal piece of history.
Yeah, in fact, we even took a picture of a plaque that's next to one of the buildings that marks it as a California historic landmark, which, as you know, Alice, is a numbered and recorded piece of Californian history that is kept on record and is actually honored and protected as like this landmark, this thing. And it was moved only a couple of streets over so that it could be inside Knott's.
So that Walter Knott and the Knott family could protect it as such.
Right.
Like, because this was a thing that they loved to do. Is collect and hoard kind of pieces of history.
And then also display and share.
Yeah, because as another thing we learned today, Knott's Berry Farm was free to enter until 1969.
Wow.
And
Still blows my mind a little bit.
that you could just wander in from the street all the way up until 1969 and not pay a dime.
There were things that you could buy, and of course it was attached to the restaurant, but it was not a place that was gated off at all.
But the stagecoach ride and the locomotive, the steam train, and all of these smaller attractions and this museum were all just free to enter. You could just walk on in.
That's incredible, and it's really incredible that we still have something like it today.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about how we feel about Knott's. Kind of our romantic, rose-tinted glasses. Kind of like nobody's going to talk bad about our theme park. But you know, when we talk about Knott's Berry Farm to perhaps people not from Southern California and for whom it isn't their backyard, the opinion does change.
It does. Infavorably.
Infavorably to poor Knott's. And like I said, Alice, nobody will talk bad about our backyard theme park.
No, we will defend it always.
But it has been called, among other things,
The like poor man's Disneyland.
yeah, discount Disneyland or worse. And that is sad.
It's
that
unfair.
is sad
I
and
think
unfair.
it's unfair. I mean, to be fair to those who aren't local and who may not know things like the history of the park and its place in space as a local landmark. Yeah, to be fair, it's not as iconic and it's not as magical.
Sure. And also, you know, Alice, we were there the other day, having just bought our season passes. And we rode just about everything in about half a day.
Yes.
And when people call theme parks half-day parks, that's not necessarily a negative, but we certainly did see the whole place in half a day. And we did everything we wanted to do.
Yes.
It's not exactly a resort.
It's not a resort. But it's also not pretending to be a resort.
No, I don't think it has any pretension in that direction.
It doesn't pretend to be Disneyland. It doesn't. And it's really just its own thing. And it's definitely geared towards locals. And to some people that means that it's lesser. But to us, it means that it's ours.
Yeah, and it serves a completely different purpose. I mean, there are things at Knott's that are Disneyland adjacent, I would say. For example, the log ride, which is one of the first of its kind. It's a log flume with themed elements that the theme is a sawmill. So
you are literally on a log going through a sawmill.
Through the wilderness as well. And it's an amazing little ride when you consider how old it is and what it manages to do. And of course you clankety clank your way up a hill, you go down through some themed elements, and then there's a big drop. And Alice, I was stunned at the scale of the thing, because I always remembered it being small compared to, say, Splash Mountain, a much bigger, much more technologically sound, much newer even, which is funny thinking about Splash Mountain as old as it is.
As new.
as this big new thing, right? But a much newer, much larger version of the same thing. And you could see where people would be like, oh man, Knott's, that's old news. Here's this bigger, newer, more musical, more animatronic thing.
Magical.
Yeah. And magic really is not what Knott's is seeking.
It never claims to be magic.
No, it claims to be fun. And that's what's so cool about the log ride, especially at Knott's, is that it is a hootenanny.
It was really fun.
Like, you arrive at a hootenanny and there's a guy running backwards on a log that's rotating and people dancing and hooping and hollering and a bear, and it's a lot.
You got scared by the bear.
The bear snuck up on me. I was looking at the cougar, and that's the thing. There was a lot.
There was a lot to see. It's an animatronic bear that legitimately scared Buddy.
Yeah, and the drop...
Just startled Buddy.
Startled. And the drop was fun, and we didn't get wet at all because it relied a lot more on the floating of the log. So by us large people sitting in the back, the smaller people sitting in the front, were able to take most of the splash. And so that was lovely. And to call it invalid because there are newer or bigger or more magical things out there is a disservice to the park and a disservice to what it provides. And there are things at Knott's that are maybe, I think that kind of outperform Disneyland, maybe either in intention or in delivery. For example, comparing the Calico Ghost Town to Frontierland is practically no contest.
Calico Ghost Town's way better than Frontierland.
Hands down, a better depiction of the American West, especially of California during 1849, the big gold rush. We have a saloon. We have a shooting gallery. We have a blacksmith. We have candle makers. We have a barbecue place. We have a Native American dance area. We have
a fake graveyard.
Oh, a fake graveyard where there's a special grave you can stand on and feel the telltale heartbeat of a dead bandit that would not die.
And some of those headstones are real.
Genuine headstones that the Knott family purchased so that they could put it in their ghost town.
They're so crazy. I love it.
and there's there's the shack where you can talk to the guy.
Oh, Sad-Eye Joe.
Sad-Eye Joe, who knows your name.
It's the best.
And it's not functioning, as we said. It's not a reenactment center. But it's a fuller, richer experience. And I would say that has its own merit. That I would almost purchase admission to the ghost town on its own if I could. Because it's just really fulfilling and immersive and just really enjoyable to walk through it. Alice, you and I were standing next to the schoolhouse this evening.
Oh, I wish we could have gone in, but I think because the schoolhouse is a authentic 1800s schoolhouse.
One-room schoolhouse.
That it was one of those buildings that Mr. Knott brought over, board by board and reconstructed. And as such, does not inside, I believe, have electric lighting.
No.
So they shut it down in the dark. So we got there and it was too dark to go in. But
that's where Walter Knott had his family educated.
Yeah.
Right there in the schoolhouse that he purchased.
He was like, yeah, I have this schoolhouse now and we run this little farm and we are bringing people in and we this is a full-time operation, so my kids are going to go to school here. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Alice, we've done a lot of this joke to ourselves where we say, wow, what are the odds? Two crazy people named Walter bought farms in Southern California and they both became successful theme parks. But I think there is a difference. Like, Walt Disney is at the time when he builds Disneyland, a world famous movie producer with a studio and
a huge vision.
Yeah, and he has this television program that he goes on and he pitches his theme park. And he spends years constructing it very meticulously.
And has eyes towards the future.
Yeah.
He's got Tomorrowland and he's got these, and later Carousel of Progress and all of these things that are about the future of theme parks and the future of entertainment.
And progress and progressivism and keep moving forward.
Yes.
And Disneyland never being done because it needs to be constantly improved and all of this, right? So that's one crazy man in California. I think Walter Knott is a different kind of crazy. And I think the difference is he was a small-time, moderately successful berry farmer from Southern California who really liked Wild West stuff. And
he was a collector, and he was a people person, and he wanted to open a restaurant and feed people and have like a community theme park.
Yeah, and have a place for the people eating at his restaurant to hang out while they waited for their table.
And that theme park that he invented grew bigger and more successful than I think he ever dreamed.
Yeah, and so it does feel kind of piecemeal and kind of bit by bit, and kind of like there's rides and attractions from different eras.
And so much of it, like in the opposite of Walt Disney, looks back. Ghost Town looks back in the Fiesta Village. Like the history of California looks backwards.
Even the biggest, most modern part of Knott's Berry Farm, which has been completely redone since Cedar Fair took over, is the boardwalk area out back with the big roller coasters.
But
right?
even then, that's just only looking back so far as the 50s.
Yeah.
But it's still looking back. This is a history, and this is not the future of roller coasters. This is, weren't the 50s cool? Look at these classic cars.
Yeah, it's nostalgia embodied. But it's nostalgia with a twist, right?
Yeah.
And it's not history. It's almost history fantasy.
Yes.
Historic fiction. Believable historic fiction, but very fake.
Very romanticized.
Yeah.
But and I think by having places like the Boardwalk, Ghost Town, the Boardwalk, Fiesta Village, even Camp Snoopy, the little kid area of it, each one of those places I think does a better job of looking back at California and reflecting on the state of California, but does a much better job than the theming of California Adventure. Now, California Adventure might be a bigger theme park with more rides and there might, you might look at it as, objectively a better
time
quote,
with big air quotes around it.
But I think that if you want a little slice of California, I think California Adventure maybe was trying to do what Knott's Berry Farm has been successful at.
I think what was part of what was misguided was that it didn't do what Knott's had been doing.
It wanted to.
It wanted to, but it chickened out. It
commercialized.
It commercialized it. It glossed over it. Postcardized, if you will. Where Knott's, if you buy a postcard at Knott's and they still cost 99 cents a piece, you get an old-fashioned photograph of a Native American chief on horseback. You get a picture of a farm. The farm. You get a black and white photograph of a guy in a cowboy costume.
Yeah.
It's smaller, down home, less ambitious, but authentic, genuine, true, and not a simulation, not a simulacra.
Exactly.
It's a little piece of it's a big piece of memorabilia.
Yes. Yeah. It's a big museum.
It's a big museum with what happens to have some big deal roller coasters.
Nice. You're stealing my phrases.
You're welcome. And it's because I actually like the phrase.
Good. Big deal coasters.
Big deal coasters. Alice, we talked a lot about how we feel about Knott's Berry Farm, or how the rest of the world may feel about Knott's Berry Farm. But we haven't really, we've pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, and I think it's time to talk about the history of Knott's Berry Farm, which I think it's important to note was a berry farm.
What?
But that's funny, but it sounds obvious, but when I was a kid, and maybe this was true for you too, I never knew it was a farm. And it called itself Knott's Berry Farm. It's not just called Knott's. Everyone around here might just call it Knott's, but it's called Knott's Berry Farm. It's everywhere.
Knott, apostrophe S, Berry Farm.
Right.
Like, it's the Berry Farm that belongs to Knott.
But I just assumed that was just like a funny made up name for the place, because clearly it wasn't a farm. It was a roller coaster place. There were no farms there. So I thought it was just some kind of like a title or something, but not a farm.
It wasn't until I was older, and actually I think it was when I started seeing Knott's brand jam and jelly in the grocery store that I was like, wait a minute. That's a berries. Like, they actually have berries at Knott's Berry
where
Farm?
are they?
But where are they?
Yeah, I actually thought that it was like part of the like joke, or like part of the story.
Right.
Like, oh, we have Knott's brand jams and jellies because like it's a berry farm, but there were no berries there. So like, I don't know, it was confusing.
And now we know so much more about the history. And as we've grown older, we're like, oh, well, yeah, this whole area used to be farms.
It was farms.
Because we've been going to Knott's our whole life, and at no point when we were kids going there as a field trip say, oh, we're going to go pan for gold. Oh, and by the way, did you know that is over there a real life hotel that used to exist in the real Calico, California? Did you know that schoolhouse isn't just, oh, we rebuilt a schoolhouse to look like an old schoolhouse, but actually is an old schoolhouse? Nobody said that to us when we were kids. No, the focus of the park was never on Walter Knott and the things that he did to build the theme park. The focus was on the park.
Yeah, it's like, here, welcome to the Calico Ghost Town, not welcome to historic Walter Knott's model ghost town that he built by himself with his money, and this is authentic. It was like, welcome to the Calico Ghost Town. I'm a miner. We're gonna mine for gold. And that's what happened. And we never asked any questions because it all seemed so natural.
Right.
Like, of course, yes, ghost town. It's a replica, sure.
But now we know it's not.
It's not. A replica. It's real-ish. I mean,
parts of it are rebuilt or fabricated, and a couple of the buildings were built by Knott himself to look like old buildings. But I don't know. I wonder why Knott's Berry Farm didn't turn Walter and Cordelia Knott into icons.
California legends.
We keep comparing Knott's to Disneyland, but in the way that Disneyland has turned Walt Disney into an icon.
Yeah.
Why didn't they do it? And does that change? Does knowing all of the really cool, amazing stuff that Walt and Cordelia Knott did, and they are icons. They're real California like entrepreneurs and business people.
Yeah.
Fun fact I just learned, then Governor Ronald Reagan spoke at their wedding anniversary, their 60th wedding anniversary, Walter and Cordelia Knott.
Before he was president, Governor Reagan
showed up at their wedding anniversary and gave a speech for them.
They were incredibly involved in the community. They worked with the historic societies. There are many plaques around Knott's Berry Farm that are like, we hereby do on this day. Wait, that's not my Reagan. That's my Kennedy. Wait, we hereby by on this day dedicate this piece of Knott's Berry Farm, and it's all there. Like it's clear that they were part of this history, and that it was. I mean, there's so much of the story of Disneyland that's like, there's this focus on Walt and his toys, and how Walt wanted to build the biggest, best toys and biggest, best train set, and to show them off to people. And there's this kind of mythology as well in the story of Walt, like being at fairs, county fairs, and he didn't like that they were dirty and temporary, and he wanted one that was clean and permanent that he could take his daughters to, and all this. You know, there's a story of Walt Disney, and we know the story because the story is written about and displayed publicly and in a big way in Disneyland, and it's talked up in a lot of ways. People are always asking, what would Walt do when they're talking about changes to be made to the park? And Walter Knott is respected. His legacy is noted, and his contribution is preserved, but it's not broadcasted.
He's not the same kind of icon.
No, he's a local town hero.
He's got streets named after him.
Yeah, he's got Knott Street, which runs almost all the way to Knott's Berry Farm.
It runs parallel to Knott's Berry Farm, which
we found out the other day.
Which is on beach. Yeah, yeah, and the chicken dinner restaurant is a staple of the area. Everyone, I mean, my grandma used to go to Knott's Berry Farm just for the chicken dinner restaurant.
That's so funny because I found out when I was talking about this episode with my folks, like, they said that my grandma's, one of her favorite things was going to the chicken dinner restaurant, and she didn't even live nearby.
No, but when she was in the area,
she would stop by for the chicken dinners.
It's iconic.
Yeah.
But the restaurant but its history and its place in the area is not necessarily well known. And why is that, do you think?
I have a theory. And the theory is thus. Knott's Berry Farm has played second fiddle, quite literally. There are many fiddles in the theme park. Played second fiddle to Disneyland. It's almost as long as it has... No, that's not true. Knott's Berry Farm has predated Disneyland by 50 years. But since Disneyland arrived, Knott's Berry Farm has had to play second fiddle. And Buena Park is Anaheim adjacent. Buena Park and Anaheim are neighbors. And Disneyland, for lack of a better term, created a crater around itself, around which all things must orbit Disneyland. And I know I'm mixing my space metaphors here, but when Disneyland crash landed here from space, it dragged the city of Anaheim into its own orbit, and it also dragged several nearby cities, and that includes Knott's Berry Farm. It's in the radius. Yeah. Buena Park is included. And Disney could have very well swallowed up a lot more of this area. When you hear about, I think it was called Port Disney, they were going to buy the Port of Long Beach and put theme park stuff there and launch cruise ships from it.
My God, I am so glad that's not.
It could have happened. And actually, you've got to see some of these plans because it's pretty fantastic.
I mean, I'm sure it would be really, really great.
But that's an entire piece of a city that would be gone. A city that we identify with.
I mean, I was born in Long Beach. I grew up in Long Beach. The Port of Long Beach is one of the biggest, busiest ports in the world.
Right.
And
they were going to buy a little piece of it.
And employs hundreds of thousands of people.
It generates billions of dollars for the country.
And to think that some of it would be theme park is crazy to me.
Almost unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
And think about the amount of impact that buying part of Long Beach would have done. All of your local Long Beach hangouts are gone. They become Disney adjacent. They become serving tourists almost exclusively. And that is true of the city of Anaheim. Yeah. I would say to a lesser extent, because it's a little farther away, it's true of Buena Park. We were driving from Knott's back to my folks' place, and there is a donut shop that has acquired Dole Whip.
Yes, there's a donut shop that claims to have some form of Dole Whip or Dole Whip-like product. And they have it and display that they have it to bring people in who want that Disneyland experience for cheaper. Everything around in a, 15-mile radius from Disneyland is like, hey, guess what? You're almost at Disneyland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's signs on the freeway and signs on the side streets in a certain radius around Disneyland, Disney has paid to have the street signs in a different color.
A different font.
They've planted more trees and have
to their specifications.
Changed the landscape of the city itself because they bring in so much money and so much tourism into the city of Anaheim. They own Anaheim, and by extension, even further from Anaheim and its surrounding areas like Stanton and Fullerton. Oh my God, everybody called Cal State Fullerton Cal State Disneyland.
Right.
Because so many people, students at Cal State Fullerton work at Disneyland. They go to the college program or just work. When I was at Cal State Fullerton, I just worked at Disneyland. Right, and so did all of my friends.
For many of us, a rite of passage to work at Disneyland briefly.
Yes.
And for others, a rite of passage to work at Knott's. But I think Knott's chip, the shoulder, or the chip that it wears on its shoulder, that is, Knott's chip is that it never was trying to be like Disneyland, but because Disneyland is a theme park and Knott's was a theme park and Disneyland was as big and as important and powerful as it was, and Knott's was kind of like Disneyland in some superficial ways,
then it's guaranteed to be compared to it,
right,
whether they want to or not.
And because there's only so much time, attention, fandom space in the area for theme parks, Knott's unfortunately has to occupy that second tier, that second choice, that place that isn't a destination internationally, but that all the kids around here can go to learn to pan for gold. And
I think Walter Knott was okay with that.
Yeah.
In fact, preferred it like that. Was like, this is our space and our local theme park, and it sprung from a farm and is bigger and better than I ever thought it could be. We don't need to compete with that other crazy Walt down the street.
No.
But it is the international eyes looking in on this area, and it's in its closeness to Disneyland that have forced that comparison, even so much so that we cannot get through an episode about Knott's Berry Farm without bringing up Disneyland.
Which is, we coached ourselves on this. We were like, this is not going to be a Disneyland-centric episode. This is going to be about Knott's. And it is, but you can't separate the two. They are entwined because of their proximity.
Knott's Berry Farm is Disneyland's, like, cool little brother. Even though it's older, it's like...
cool, older, but less mature brother. Doing donuts in his El Camino out back in the parking lot.
It's so bad. It sounds so bad, and it sounds like we're dissing it.
Nobody's going to talk bad about my theme park.
We love Knott's Berry Farm. To the point where maybe we're the only ones who are allowed to make fun of it.
Right.
I feel like only locals can make fun of Knott's.
Because Knott's is kind of like our cool younger brother.
It's like, like I can pick on my little brother, but God help you if you pick on my little brother, because I'm going to hurt you.
Knott's sometimes feels kind of beat up. And in our research for this episode, I found an ad that Knott's took out in the paper that said... and this is from years ago, but it said, "Don't just stop at Disneyland." Encouraging people to maybe if they were coming to visit and to try Knott's as well. Like try this brand of theme park as well. And
you got an extra day or an extra half day? Swing on by.
It's Knott's Berry Farm. Have chicken dinner. Eat boysenberry pie.
Oh, please eat the boysenberry pie.
Please eat the boysenberry pie.
So good.
It's heavenly. And we learned today, actually, the origin of the boysenberry.
I didn't know it was a manufactured berry.
I didn't know that it was named after a man named Boysen. Here's Iron Horse Steve to tell us about it.
Now, when the boysenberry came along around in 1912, it was actually invented by Rudolph Boysen. He actually spliced together a local berry, a blackberry and a red raspberry, and came up with the boysenberry. But believe it or not, we almost didn't get it due to the fact he didn't have any faith in the boysenberry. In fact, he ended up throwing all the seeds he created in the creek and back his property, thought they'd float downstream, and that would be the end of it. However, fortunately for us, they didn't float downstream. They actually grew that winter. So by the spring of 1913, folks were saying, "Hey, mister, can we pick the berries in the back of your yard?" Well, he had to go back and take a look because he was unaware of any berries growing back there. And then when he saw what he had, he contacted Mr. Knott, and a few other farmers were looking for things to grow at that time. And when Mr. Knott came over and saw what he had, he said, "Hey, let's call it a boysenberry." That's how supposedly how he got its name.
That is, in all of our research, we didn't hear anything like
It was so good.
And
It's so fascinating.
to know that fact and to know that the claim to fame of this berry farm was an accidental berry hybrid that was supposed to be a failure that got bought up and turned into the best darn pie in the area and made a moderately successful farm good enough to have a chicken dinner restaurant that became a destination. So they had to have some entertainment, so that they built a ghost town that eventually became an elaborate place to put people and attractions. And then they started to charge admission, and now it's what it is.
It's so apt.
It is.
We're going to throw these seeds down the river. Oh, what? They planted and grew, and now we have a theme park?
It's almost mythological.
That, if they told that story all the time, I wish they would.
Yeah, I really wish that when you board the train, that it would be like, "This is the train that Walter Knott, blah, blah, blah. And did you know about the legend of the Boysenberry?" And like, it could be this thing. It has a boysenberry. There's a boysenberry festival.
Yes.
There's a boysenberry pie eating contest that's very highly publicized.
Ooh, after discovering how good the boysenberry pie it actually is, I kind of want to enter.
And there's all of this culture surrounding Knotts, but it, again, small town, second fiddle, not international. And if you want to catapult something to the level of myth, to the level of being legendary, like perhaps Walt Disney, I think it's about having a clear story that you say a lot to a lot of people and that resonates with them. And I think that's what the Knotts didn't quite have, and maybe still don't quite have, in a way that works on the same level. Because they weren't media moguls. They were farmers who got big and built a part of a town to be special, but didn't ever ask for more than that. And so they didn't necessarily get it. And that's okay. And Knott's is still there and beautiful.
Yeah. I love it. I love Knott's Berry Farm. And I won't let anyone trash it.
No. Except us.
We can trash it. but we won't. Maybe a little.
Just a little.
Well, buddy, I think part 2 of our Knott's special has come to an end.
Yeah, and Alice, you and I do plan to go back at least one more time this summer to just grab a couple more small details that we can turn into something else. We're not sure what it's going to be yet.
Yeah, I am not done talking about Knott's Berry Farm. I think maybe this will be a continuing series past the summer. Every once in a while, bringing up something new that we've discovered about the park.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more to dive into.
Yeah.
And we want to thank you, listeners, for sticking around. If you go on to our Twitter accounts, I'm at Alice White THP, and he's at Buddy_Duquesne, Duquesne.
Thank you. You spelled my name correctly.
I've known you my whole life. We will be posting some pictures from our visit tonight of a couple of the plaques that we saw, a couple of the pieces in the museum that we saw, and just some and I went live. There's a short video on my Twitter account where you can see we were at the top of the Sky Cabin.
For the historic Sky Cabin, 180 feet in the air, rotating view of Buena Park, California. It was beautiful.
A beautiful 360-degree view of the sunset. And you can check all that out and follow us on Twitter. Reach out to us if you have any ideas or questions or opinions about these episodes. We'd be happy to hear it.
Hey, Alice, aren't we also on Facebook?
That's true. You can go to facebook.com/thosehappyplaces. Like us and join in the conversation about theme parks, rides, and attractions.
That's excellent. And did you know that the listeners who are listening to this right now are hearing our theme music?
Is our theme music called Golden Gate by the California Feetwarmers featuring Phil Alvin?
It is. And you can find the Feetwarmers at their website, www.californiafeetwarmers.com.
Excellent. And is there additional music that they may have heard throughout this episode?
You know, Alice, I think that I will be adding in some additional music by Podington Bear. His music is available on the Free Music Archive, freemusicarchive.org. It's all free to use and available for all of your podcasting needs. You should absolutely check it out.
Excellent. Additional audio in this episode was recorded live. We want to again send our sincerest thanks to Knott's Berry Farm and specifically to Iron Horse Steve, who was just honestly such a delight to talk to.
Just a wonderful historian, and he took so much time out of his night, I would say, to tell us just a little bit more about the park that we simply could not know on our own. And listeners should be aware that all was recorded on site at Knott's Berry Farm on July 8th, 2018.
Thank you, Knott's Berry Farm, for everything. You are great, and we love you.
Yes, and this is not sponsored by you, but thank you for
existing.
Gosh,
we wish you were.
Aw. Thank you for listening, and we hope you return to those happy places.